Hey, Yomis. Thank you so much for joining us today here, whether you're coming in on YouTube or you're listening on our podcast channels. We are so glad you're back here, and we cannot do this without our listeners, but we also can't do it without our guests. So Katie Doble is famous, I think, in the ocular melanoma world, and with good reason. With good reason, but she's from Colorado, and if you don't know who she is one of the, I think the first like TIL therapy responder, like super responder basically. I mean, we'll get into that, but for the most part, like, okay, Katie, we're both Swifties. What do you feel like is a song? Let's just pick one. I know there's probably many, but one song you could pick that would define like your journey like today.
A Taylor Swift song?
Yes, a Taylor Swift
Oh
song.
gosh. I don't know. I do not know. I mean, I have favorites of hers. I will say anti-hero because my motivation in my fight has been my nieces and my nephews. My nephew and niece got tickets when she came to Denver a couple years ago, and we were only able to get one ticket for a chaperone for them.
Mhm.
And my sisters wanted to go, but I'm a bigger fan, and I'm the favorite and fun aunt, and so I got to take them, which was amazing. And they made me a bracelet that said anti-hero, and so that song has always been um, kind of a favorite of mine for that reason.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the best. I got to go to the Eras Tour as well. It was like we were in Phoenix. We were the first stop for the Eras Tour when she first
Okay.
launched. And so we got to go opening night, like very first time that it ever went, and it was incredible. I don't think I've ever been to a Taylor Swift concert before that, despite like basically growing up on her music. And
Mhm.
oh, it was
It was
absolutely
magical.
transcendent.
Yes,
It was magical.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, when I think about your journey, I'm not gonna lie, like maybe an easy song for me to kind of put in there and into what I know about your story is Long Live. And just
Yes.
like,
Oh my God. Yeah. And when that came
oh
on, I was like totally crying at the concert.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, oh, and that one, that's the song that I sing like every time I do cryotherapy, like which is basically standing in a freezer for 5 minutes
Yes. I've done
for
that. Yeah.
for health, for fun.
Yeah.
But I listen to Long Live and I
A great
sometimes
one.
sing it. And anyway, it's such a good song though. Okay, so Taylor Swift, obviously we love Taylor Swift. Um, but Katie, you are a ocular melanoma survivor, and that's not really very common. Like I think that we talk about ourselves as being survivors, in the sense that like, hey, like I'm still here, I'm disease free, like,
Mhm.
and I think we think of, especially in the metastatic world, we think of survivors as like, oh, like those are just the people who never metastasized, like because in the OM world, it feels so rare sometimes to
Mhm.
even know that there's anybody who's ended up with metastatic disease and who has I don't want to say succeeded, but who has come out on top, right? Like who has
Mhm.
has beat the statistics and just kind of combated the odds despite everything that was stacked against them. So let's talk a little about this idea of you being a survivor versus what do you identify more as?
Yeah. So I'll just back up a little bit and give you a high level sort of how I got to where I am. I was diagnosed primary in um, May of 2013. I was 31 years old. I had the Castle Biosciences testing done, and I was a 1A. I don't even know if they still do that anymore, but I was told at the time there was a less than 2% chance that it would spread. So I was like, yay, that's great. Like I lost vision in my eye. They were able to keep my eye, but that was it. And I thought I was done being a cancer survivor. A year and a half later, thankfully, my doctor had recommended I do routine liver ultrasounds. And so a year and a half later, I got a phone call after my morning ultrasound. There were 12 plus suspicious lesions. A biopsy shortly after confirmed that it had metastasized. That doctor told me that I had 16 months to live if I was lucky. And she told me I had one treatment option. She recommended I get on Yervoy, and that was it. My dad is a doctor. He is a retired internist, and my mom died of pancreatic cancer when I was 15 years old. So he was no stranger to the world of medicine. He always says, I'm not a specialist. And I'm like, Dad, you know way more about this than most people do. And having him guide me, it saved my life. So in a nutshell, I went on to do 4 clinical trials all over the country. And my 4th clinical trial that I did was called TIL therapy, tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes. I had that in September of 2020. I saw good response from that. A year later, there was one festering tumor, is what my doctor kept calling it. So I naturally named the tumor Uncle Fester. So in September of 2021, I had this major operation where they cut a 13-inch incision in my abdomen. They took out half of my liver and all remaining cancer. And when I woke up from that surgery, Dr. Kamula said, "You're no evidence of disease." In that 7.5-year journey where I was in the thick of the fight, I called myself a thriver. I didn't feel like a survivor yet because to me, the word survivor meant you're done. And so for me, thriver meant you're still in it and you're thriving and you're doing well. And so that was a word that was really, really important to me in the journey process, or in the, in the clinical trial process. And I quite honestly never even anticipated, of course, we all hope that one day I'd be able to say this cancer is no longer in my body, but really it was just, you're just in it. Like you're just taking it day by day. And so it wasn't something I had really dwelled on. And so when that day happened, September 17th of 2021, and I woke up from that surgery, it was amazing. It was, it was a dream come true. But one of the things that I noticed right away was everybody was like, "You're done." And you referenced that article that the woman recently published about survival and kind of the in between. And for me, when I became no evidence of the disease, the amount of people that were like, "Cool, so you're good now," and I'm like, "God, no, I'm just beginning." Like it's surviving cancer, living with cancer, surviving with cancer. It's trauma, and so those first few days afterwards, where everybody was like wanting to throw me a party, and I'm like, I can't even go to the bathroom unassisted right now. Like I'm still in a world of hurt. I have a massive road to recovery ahead of me. One person was like, "Oh, I thought it was like a laparoscopic surgery. Like I thought you were good and bounced back." I'm like, no, 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 no. Like they took out half of a major organ. And so my body had to recalibrate from that. And then there was the mind and just what my mind had to go through to process. And as I've mentioned to you earlier, there was no one for me to call. Like I didn't know of anyone else in our very, very small community who had gotten to the point I had gotten to. And so that was isolating. And I also felt like I couldn't complain to my Omies who were still in the fight, because they're like, "I'm not gonna feel sorry for you." Like I want to have what you have. And so that has been challenging as well. And I remember the day I got diagnosed, I think as a primary, and I asked that doctor, who I'm still very, very close with, I asked him a question about other patients, and he said, "You're all kind of your own lonely little birds in this process." And I will never forget hearing that. And it is remained, even as, even when it metastasized, even when I became a survivor, it's still a lonely place to be, because it is such a rare cancer and none of us are behaving the same way. All of us have a different experience. What's worked for you isn't working for somebody else, and vice versa. So it's really hard to it's easy to feel isolated. It's easy to feel alone. It's easy to feel like nobody understands me. But I think we've built a great community. I actually had a dream last night about you, me, and Ashley hanging out, and I was like, "God, do this more often." We've built a great community. We've learned kind of where and how to find each other, but then that also makes it hard because the hits come frequently, as you know.
Yeah, the hits absolutely come frequently. And those relationships with other patients, like you said, like when we're so isolated, especially like literally isolated, because in maybe our region there's not any patients around us, or there's very few. But then also just isolating because of the uniqueness of the story, right? The uniqueness of the path and the way that we walk this journey. And that in and of itself, I think, you mentioned trauma, like the trauma that we experience, everybody experiences that differently. The lens that we view life and like kind of how we make sense of everything, like how we make meaning, how we process, like all of those things are so unique to each of us as individuals. And I want to just kind of point out something that you talked about earlier. You said that you really felt like it was important to distinguish between being just like, between being a survivor, meaning, that you had made it through, versus being a thriver, meaning you're in it, but you're thriving. And I think that one of the things that I took away from you saying that is that you kind of found a way to give meaning to a word and give meaning to like kind of the way that you lived your life, and the language that you used was really important to you. And so I always I find it frustrating sometimes when I hear of patients who their doctor like leads with, oh, you're going to be alone in this. You're going to be super lonely. Like you're going to be, because I do think that shapes our experience as patients. And the language that we use, I think it really gives power to the situation that, that we're approaching. And I mean, yes, it can feel isolating. We can feel alone, even when we have friends, even when we have people that we know, even when somebody's going through something that's really similar to us. But I do think that it's important to recognize that, even in that isolation, we can also feel connected. We can also feel held, and just able to find the people who we click with at the right time. I think that that's kind of what I've experienced. But I think that the language that we approach our disease with, and the kind of the phrases we use to describe ourselves, to describe what we're experiencing, like those are all such important words. And so I would just challenge you guys listening, like, what words are you using to describe your journey? Are you sitting in kind of all of the negative, all of the hard things, and only talking about those challenging, aspects? Or are you finding, despite all of that, like something that's a gift? Anyway, okay, I'll get off my soapbox there.
And one more thing to add to that, I think what's been fascinating for me to observe, because I'm very involved in the ocular melanoma community, and my first encounter with the OM community was a disaster. So I had to kind of tread lightly coming back in, but I'm also very involved with a young adult cancer community. And it's funny because I've never, like, I use the word fight, my fight with cancer. I beat cancer. It was a battle. Like, those words don't bother me, but I know a lot of people who hate the war analogies. And so I think it's important to note what works for you might not work for somebody else, and that's okay. Like, different things are gonna resonate with us. And one other thing I'll say about that is learning, like viewing and learning toxic positivity has been something that I've learned more about than I think I would have if I was a healthy 30-something. I mean, in my 40s now. But there are some people who are like, I can never have a negative thought, and I'm all positive all the time. And again, you do you. If that's you, that's great. And there are some people who sit in the kind of negative tent. And for me, I always tried to be as positive as I could. But when I was having those moments of anger, the emotions that we think are bad and unnecessary, they are necessary. So it was important for me when I was feeling pissed off or scared or sad to just kind of let myself and know I'm going to have this day. And I feel like you are so vulnerable in your posts, and you do a good job of saying, like, you know what, I'm having a pity party today, and then I'm going to pick myself up and move on tomorrow. And that I think is so important, is to, if you are just a positive person 24/7, great, good for you. But as humans, most of us are experiencing a range of emotions. And so it's important to kind of make space and give a platform to the hard ones, the challenging emotions that people don't always want to see on social media, but they're real. And so it's important to let yourself have them.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I don't have anything to add. I feel like you just said it perfectly. You mentioned just kind of like relating to patients and navigating relationships with patients over the last, goodness, how many years has it been since your primary diagnosis again?
I mean, it's been 13 years since my primary diagnosis.
Okay. And it's been about 5, coming up on 5, or past 5 years?
I will be 5 years, no evidence of disease in September. So 4.5 years.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I'm like trying to like timeline this a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's get a whiteboard and let's draw it out, like right here. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to summon a whiteboard like Harry Potter or, something like that. But as you're navigating relationships and like advocating with other patients, which I do want to touch on, we can talk a little more about that in a few minutes. But navigating those relationships, especially when you come into the community and you're fresh, and whether you're freshly, finding out that you're metastatic or just new to the primary diagnosis, it can feel, I think, really vulnerable and scary to like make friends, right? To make those online friends, to go meet people at an event. Like hopefully you guys
Mhm.
come to, I hope everybody comes to I Believe this next year in Texas. But like meeting patients can feel really vulnerable. How have you navigated relationships with patients, and like what do you feel like
Yes.
is really important?
So I alluded to my first encounter with an ocular melanoma community, and it was back in, I think it was maybe 2016, and I was in a break. It was in between treatments, and I thought I'm going to do this, and I went, and it was terrifying. I was all alone with all these people, and it was the majority primary. And I said to someone who was there, God, like she could kind of tell I was getting overwhelmed. And I was like, I feel like there's just a bunch of primaries here. And she was like, oh, that's not true. You just met so and so. Her husband was a secondary. He died last month. And I was like, like,
What? I mean, you just
um,
dropped that in the middle of the conversation. Thank you so
I'm
much.
like, that doesn't help me. And at one point we broke out into small groups. Well, our group was small. The primary group was massive. The secondary group was maybe, I don't know, like 8 of us with a moderator.
Mhm.
And it was um and one guy talked, and he had had similar treatments to mine, and he was about to have I think he was about to have a liver embolization, which is a non-clinical trial therapy that I had. And then another guy was like, yeah, I'm, cutaneous Mets, and I'm no evidence of disease and I'm like, dude, you don't have the same cancer we do. Like skin cancer is not the same so like, while I appreciate where you are, none of us can relate to you.
Yeah.
And then this one woman basically, like when it was my turn to talk, I was like trying to be positive, trying to say, here's the silver lining, here's what I've done. And this, and one of the things that I've done is that I have not ever Googled my cancer. And I come from a place of privilege to make that choice because I come from, my sister's a GI nurse, my sister-in-law is a CRNA, my stepmom is a retired CRNA, and my dad is a doctor. So I understand that like I come from privilege to be able to like delegate that. But I had talked about that, and this woman, it's her turn to talk, and she basically attacked me. And she was like, I do my own research, and so I clearly hit a nerve, and I got up and I left the room, and I literally went to my room, I packed my bag, and I flew home early. And I was a mess. Um, Both the guy who sat next to me who had had the same treatments and the woman who kind of attacked me, they both passed away. Um, and so I took a big time out from connecting with other patients. Then I discovered First Descents, which is a nonprofit for young adults with cancer, and I thought I'm going to give it one more go because I have great support, but like nobody in my world understood what I was going
Yeah.
through. And so through that, this was my big learning. I don't need you to have my exact cancer. I need you to have my attitude. So that's my approach in connecting with people. And you can sense on the online communities, you can learn a lot about a person by reading their posts, reading their tone. And so that's how you make connections. You connect with those people who have a like-minded response to what you think or what you feel. And
Mhm.
through the OM community and through the First Descents community, I have made all of these incredible connections. And every single person that I really, really connect with, like you, like Ashley, they have a similar outlook and attitude that I do. I'm not saying that ours is right and someone else's is wrong. I'm saying for me, it's important for some to feel seen, to feel safe.
Mhm.
And you just know. I mean, it's the same as everyday life. There are some people that you really click with and have chemistry with, and there's some people that you don't. And so for me, that's been important. I've had to set a lot of boundaries on connecting with other patients.
Yeah.
And my sort of rule is if you're ocular melanoma, I will try my best to talk to you because I can actually help you. If you're another rare melanoma or even cutaneous melanoma, depending on the connection and my bandwidth, will try to talk to you. Where I've had to set boundaries is if you're someone who's, kids on a baseball team and another kid's father has a rare brain tumor, that does not translate. And just because it's spread to my brain, it's a totally different animal. And healthy people don't understand that.
Yeah,
And good for
no,
them.
it's tricky.
And so I have learned, I had a friend reach out recently, and she had an old neighbor who was 75 years old and stage 4, and she told her about my story, and she wondered if I could talk to her. And I was like, what kind of cancer is it? And I had to say no, because I work full time. I've got a lot on my plate. And so that's a boundary that I have set, because I can't talk to everyone. You and I can't talk to every single person. But I'm going to call someone today whose mom was recently diagnosed with ocular melanoma, and she's getting her MRI results tomorrow. And I'm like, yeah, I will try to call you on my way to my afternoon meeting and tell you what I can tell you. And I'm not a medical professional. But we know how to navigate. We know where to get the second opinion. We know the importance of that strategy. And so those are boundaries that I've set in order to feel like I'm being a good resource for people, but also protecting my own mental health, my own schedule, and also my family's. Like I am a dog mom, and I have a husband, and I can't spend every weekend doing all of the things. Like I also want to, be with him
Live
and
your
do the
life.
things that we do, live my life. So, but it's a hard balance.
No, it's such a tricky balance. And I completely relate, just being where I'm at, in the nonprofit sphere, and how I educate the patient community. A lot of them know my face. They see me online.
Mhm.
And I think that, we have to be sometimes in this kind of more public sphere where, you're a little more well known because to
Right,
work
where
for
your
you,
cancer
people
thing
talk
is.
about that all the time. Yeah, you're cancer free right now. Like, and so you're like a highly desired asset, right? Everybody wants to hear your story of hope.
Mhm.
And I think that the challenge for us as individuals, especially if it sounds like you're a lot like me in the sense that you're pretty empathetic
I
towards
want to
other
help
people.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, like you want to help everyone, and that's not a bad quality, right? If we are
Yeah.
empathetic people, it's not a bad quality, but we do have to be careful in guarding our energy. And
Mhm.
I want to point out, like you talked about the phase when you went to the patient meeting and you just had a really challenging experience, walked away from that and were like, oh my gosh, like can't do this.
Yeah.
I do want to just put that out there. I hope, if anything, to kind of maybe let that not be something to be scared of. I think that it's just so important that we approach meeting other patients with the mentality of, okay, like I'm probably going to meet other people who have a different viewpoint. They're all going to be
Mhm.
at different phases, but even within that sphere, like it is possible to find people who have, the same outlook or a similar way of processing things, because I do think
Yep.
that there's power in being able to, verbally process and talk through what you're going through with someone else. But the other piece of what I wanted to say was that if you're in the midst of metastatic disease, right? Like you were in the middle of metastatic treatment. And I
Mhm.
just think that heightens the
Oh,
vulnerability of
yeah.
us as patients. And it can be so easy. It can be so easy to, and I want to just give credit to the woman that you mentioned. Like when she, you felt like she was attacking you, she probably felt like she was attacked, of like, well, like I wasn't supposed to Google. What do you mean I wasn't supposed to
Yeah.
Google? Like we're all just so much more, I think we're all just so much more sensitive.
So
And
sensitive. Yeah.
and it's just one of those things that, I mean, this is why I advocate for going to therapy. Like I go to therapy so I can
Oh,
talk about all those challenging interactions
yeah.
with somebody who can help me understand, my role and also my brain's role in understanding and processing what's going on around me. And I just think that when you're in the middle of a metastatic phase of your journey, you are in the middle of trauma, and it's okay if you can't
Mhm.
stay connected to patients constantly. It's okay
Yeah.
if you take breaks. Like, I mean, it really, sometimes you really just have to.
I
And
do.
it
And
doesn't mean there's
yeah.
anything wrong with you.
Mhm. I will say to that, one, it was not your organization's event. And two, I mean, that was 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, the what was happening with our disease was way different. there were
Yeah.
way fewer options. And I feel like I have been in this community for 10 plus years and I have watched the hope rise. And I feel like what used to be, you know, a way worse prognosis, it's changed. It's getting there. There are options. There's hope. I feel like our community has become a lot stronger. And I recognize that at that moment, it was too soon, but also probably not the best approach. Like, not the best approach for me to fly across the country alone, not know anyone. And I'm a friend hoarder. Like, I love making new friends and meeting new people. But it was too raw. It was way too raw.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about other people, and I learned a lot about the fact that we all are approaching this differently, and that, again, no one's way is right or wrong. But we need to respect each other and hold each other up and let each other do what each other is going to do. I might not agree
Yeah.
with with someone being on Google 14 or 16 hours a day. I'm not going to do that for myself. But if that's what works for them, then by all means, like, do what you need to do, because we've all lost control, and I'm a control freak. And so when you get a cancer diagnosis, you no longer have control of anything, and so we're
Yeah.
looking to control things we can control. So for me, I started to become more aware of my diet. That's where I tried to get more control. What can I do? What can I control here? My diet, my exercise became important. For some people, it's the research. I admire people like you and others in the community who understand the science way more than I ever will, and are educating the rest of us on what is this therapy and why will it work for you and maybe not. I I am not, that is not my strength. My strength is my empathy and my, you know, ability to connect with people. And so I try to do that where I can. And the other thing that I've done is created my blog so that I am able to point people, if I can't talk to them, I can say, but I wrote this piece. A lot of times when people are brand new diagnosed, they're like, I heard about your story. I'm like, cool, here's my clinical history. I have my clinical history on my blog so that that can be a starting point for somebody to understand, who do I maybe need to be talking to? What steps do I maybe need to be taking right now? So I'm trying to kind of package it so that I'm saving myself from having to repeat the same story over and over again,
Yeah.
but also be able to provide resources. I love seeing how much we're all coming together as a community to try to educate, and we're taking what our strengths are to do that. And like Chris
Yeah.
White, who's a rare, Chris, right?
Yeah. He's a rare mucosal melanoma patient.
Mucosal, yeah. So he's big on TIL, and he's trying to, he's doing a lot in the TIL community. So I do think it's amazing to me to see how the patients stay involved, how the patients are trying to take what Oprah calls trauma-informed wisdom and pass it back along to the next person, because we're all
Yeah.
trying to figure this out as we go. And the challenge is that none of us, we're all unique in our path. So it's going to be
Yeah,
different for every
absolutely.
single one of us. So
Well, Katie, with 13 years under your belt as an ocular melanoma patient, I know that you have seen a lot of people come and go, and
mhm.
and I can imagine, especially, well, I don't even know that it would be more poignant at the beginning of your TIL journey versus now. I think that, there's room for it to still just be challenging just across the board,
Mhm.
to feel that tension of like, okay, like I'm grateful that I responded to my treatment, while also carrying the weight of knowing that a lot of other people have not had that same outcome, whether it was
Yeah.
with TIL or just generally.
Mhm.
Do you talk about that with anybody? And like, just how do you process losses in the community with kind of the balance that you are a survivor?
Yes. So I also have an amazing therapist. And I will do high kicks for that all day, every day. My therapist is also a survivor. She was amazing when I became no evidence of disease. She's like a freaking crystal ball reader. She's just really a smart woman. And she proactively reached out to my siblings and basically sent them an email and was like, guys, buckle up. Because I know this is super exciting for you, but like, you have no idea what she's about to go through emotionally with this information. And really, like, kind of helped them anticipate the grief that I would go through, which I think none of us could understand. I have the double mind. I don't want to say the F word, but you know what I'm alluding to, of losing my mom, and like, so it's complex. Like it's a really complex survival. And so I have my therapist, but I also do energy work. So I have this, I call her this goddess named Joanna, and she does massage, meditation, Reiki, cupping, and acupuncture, depending on what's happening with my aura that day. And she's always like, get on my table, and she does her magic. And there have been so many times where I've gone to her table and I am just bawling because my best friends just lost their 6-year-old son, or because my friend Lindsay, who went through all the same treatments that I did, passed away and left behind 3 teenagers. And it's this constant, like it's hard because I feel bad complaining about it because I'm still here, but it's this constant reminder. And then it makes me spiral of, why am I still here? What is my purpose? What am I doing with my life? Am I living it right? That first year after I became no evidence of disease, anytime I experienced a non-positive emotion, I would like beat myself up. And so it was this really like, I just had to kind of figure out my new cadence and like show myself grace. And Joanna would help me. She knew that exercise was important to me. And so she was the one who suggested, when you experience a loss in your community, I want you to do a hike in that person's name or honor and then let it go. Like, I cannot hold on to the grief of every single person that I've lost, on top of the grief from losing my mom that is still something I carry every single day. And not that I'm letting go and don't care, but it's like finding a place and finding a purpose. And so for me, it's been, and even, for my friends fighting, my friend Aaron got his TIL a couple of weeks ago, and I happened to be at the state capitol in Denver, Colorado, advocating with the American Cancer Society that day. And so we got to make a sign of, I stand for, and I wrote his name, and then I did a bike ride that night, and I just thought of him while I did it. And so for me, it's that physical, it's the movement, it's the carrying people when I'm physically moving my body because I can, and honoring them in that way. And that's something that has been, I think, a healthy way for me to, because an alternative would be like, you get a large Dairy Queen Blizzard, which I would also love, but I'm not doing that. Although I do sometimes. So yeah, finding something that's like healthy for my mental state, healthy for my physical state, and allows me to kind of honor that person, and then, but not have it take me down completely. And I'm not saying that works all the time, because there are some that are way bigger gut punches because you got to be really close friends with that person.
Yeah.
And I know I don't have
to. Well, I think what you shared earlier, like kind of as you were gathering your thoughts around this, was you talked a lot about how, the therapist that you've worked with talked a lot about the grief that you were going to experience after being told you're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Like that we're really pretty confident, like you're doing great, and you've continued to stay doing great. And there, I think that we talk a lot about the grief that we get, right, of getting the cancer diagnosis. But I don't think that we talk a whole lot about, like, I think we call it survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
But I think it's maybe better to call it survivor's grief, because there's a lot of grief of, I don't know, like just grieving the life that was changed in the period of time that you were actively fighting cancer.
I never get to have because cancer hijacked my 30s. I mean,
there's so much grief.
There's so much loss. The loss of the life that I was living. Would I go back and live that life? No. Like, I love you talked earlier about like the lens we look through now, which is funny because it's eye cancer. Like, the lens in which I view my life, I'm so grateful and I appreciate it so much. But every day there's a reminder of the fact that like I didn't get to have a family. And that's hard. That's hard for my husband and me. There was a baby shower this weekend, and I reached out to the host and I was like, no, I don't do baby showers typically because it's hard. And she struggled with IVF. So she's like, I totally get it. But it's setting those boundaries and stating those boundaries. But I love what you say about survivor's grief, because that is 100% what it is. It's grief of the loss of a different life. But then there's also survivor's gratitude. And I have that as well. Like there's so much gratitude. When my oldest nephew was born, a very, very dear friend got me a t-shirt that says, "I'm Pete's Aunt Kate." And I have a lot of pictures of me
sweet.
like him growing up and me having the t-shirt on. And I wore it to his high school graduation. And it was a big hit. People were like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." But I was like, I have this side-by-side picture of, little NICU preemie Pete and then Pete who now towers over me. And I have so much gratitude in those moments. I took that day off work and I was like, I'm out of pocket. Like I celebrate big, the milestones in my life that I get to be here to witness. And I'm so, so, so grateful for those.
I absolutely love what you said about survivor's grief, survivor's gratitude. There's this duality, I think, that,
Yeah.
we have to come to learn the older we get, that it's possible to feel two things at once or five things at once. I love the movie Inside Out that talks about all the emotions at the control panel. And it's like, they're all there. They're always there all the time. It's just who's getting the most noise. So Katie, to end, I wanted to give you a chance to just chat a little about one of the most meaningful things that I have. Yes, you connect with patients and you do such a beautiful job of talking to people individually when you can. But I also recognize that sometimes it's not something that we have the bandwidth for personally, and that sometimes the bigger kind of meaning making that we can make of where we are in our disease is staying involved in the community by advocating. So why do you feel like you shifted from where you were as a, survivor, thriving, but then surviving, and to now where you're at with, really strongly advocating for research, for ocular melanoma, for all of it?
I think for me, that has been my purpose. So, I gave my first talk in 2017. I was getting recognition with a group of other patients for survival in ocular melanoma. And I was asked on behalf of the other patients to give a talk. And I was terrified of public speaking before that. And I got up there and I was like, wow, this is, I think, what I'm supposed to be doing. Like it felt, I just felt very empowered. I felt like I was able to take my trauma and turn it into something good. And so from there, because a lot of times people are like, I really want to do more advocacy. You just have to manifest it. You have to put it out to the universe. You have to tell people. And so I started, I think in maybe 2021, I gave my first kind of big talk at a science conference. And it has just snowballed from there. And I do it for every single one of my peers who has passed and every single one of my peers who is still fighting, because I know that in the thick of my, fight, I didn't have the bandwidth. Like you don't have the energy to get up and fight, but I am in a place now where I can, and I know how important it is. And I'm seeing the devastating impacts of what's happening with science right now. And my doctor who saved my life lost funding. And that is, and I have talked to patients that he's had to turn away. And that is terrifying to me, and it's not okay. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to help to make a difference, to try to make noise, to try to get people to understand that just because it's rare doesn't mean that our lives don't matter too. And we're not the masses. We're not a mainstream cancer. We are just this little, but it's affecting 6 in a million of us. And so I will continue to use my voice and my platform and tell my story, and also through writing. I wrote that story for Huffington Post about navigating clinical trials, because I think that a lot of people get diagnosed and it's, I don't know, the first time in their lives that they've been in this position. Timing is critical. Their next move is critical. They're getting pressure from a doctor to do something. My doctor was saying, you got to start Yervoy. You got to start Yervoy. If I would have listened to that doctor, I would be dead. And so my story, there's a lot of lessons from my story that can help people. And I had someone reach out to me after that article, and they said a few weeks later, they got a critical diagnosis. And because they had read what I wrote, they were able to navigate properly. So it's taking what I've learned, taking the hard lessons and trying to make it so that the next person who doesn't have Dr. Jim Ortman as their father, like I do, knows what to do and has the resources, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. And I want to make sure that people know what to do. So yeah.
No, I think it's absolutely incredible. And I mean, just watching what you do, and I know, like, again, we're giving the disclaimer that the credit where credit is due to experiencing a metastatic diagnosis. If you're in the thick of a metastatic diagnosis, that may not be the time for you to
No.
like go to Capitol Hill or, stress
Yeah.
yourself out about, am I doing enough?
Hmm.
You're trying to survive and to thrive where you're at. And if advocating helps you do that, then great. But if it doesn't, then it's not where you belong right now. And you just need to
Yeah.
focus on what's most important to you. And I think that as patients, too often we see and we compare ourselves to what other people are
Yeah.
doing and we say, oh, I should be doing this. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we do that. So,
Hmm.
but thank you, Katie, for
And
like
no
everything
right or
that you
wrong.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is like there really is no right or wrong. I've said from the get-go of getting this diagnosis, like there's not like a rule book. Like
No.
this cancer didn't come with a rule book of like what we do and what we don't do and like what's okay and what's not. We're figuring it out and we're figuring it out every single day. And it looks a little different in different seasons and different years, different political climates, like different everything. Like everything makes it feel different at different times. And I know,
Yeah.
like, even now, Katie, like you mentioned earlier when we were chatting, like you still feel the anxiety coming up on scans and like just
Oh
the
yeah.
doctor's appointments, like that you still have to manage all of that. That doesn't go away
Mhm.
just because you are considered disease free.
The paranoia runs deep in these bones.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And
I
I
totally
don't
get
know.
it.
Yeah, like I literally like my elbow twitches and I'm like, I had a ganglion cyst last year on my wrist and I told my sister, I'm like, it's sarcoma. I'm gonna have to shave my head. I'm never gonna wear mascara again. Like I'm like telling her all the things and she goes,
You're like, I have gone down the rabbit hole.
yeah, I go, they're gonna amputate my arm and this is what's gonna happen. And she goes, is this what it's like to be you? And I said, this is 100% what it's like to be me. Like I'm
Yeah,
just, yeah. So
I get it.
yeah.
Well, Katie, I mean, I feel like there's so much more that we could chat about. I would love to keep you on here, but I want to go ahead and let you go, get back to the rest of your day, get back to living
Yes.
life. But Katie, thank you for sharing your story, for sharing the hope that you have, and just for being real with us.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this and for being who you are to our community.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And honestly, I couldn't do it without the support of people like you. So thank you for being one of those people in my life. Um, I would love to have you come back and maybe we can chat a little more like in depth about the advocacy piece and like how
Yeah.
you've kind of put together your path of where do you advocate and why and how. I think that would be kind of a really unique thing for us to just to share because if you are living with primary metastatic or primary ocular melanoma and you have the lowest risk of metastasis and you're sitting here feeling like, well, I want to do something, maybe that's a
Hmm.
direction that you could go.
Yeah.
Because I think that you said something earlier about how like it's so important that we just find what is kind of giving us purpose, right? Giving us an
Yeah.
individual purpose, and that we each have our own little spot, and that we fit
Hmm.
into the puzzle that is ocular melanoma, and each of us is important, right? Every single one of us,
Yeah.
every single person who's come before and who we've lost, but also like each of us right now, like where you're at today, like there's a reason for that. So let's figure that
Hmm.
out.
Yeah. I'd love to. I
Awesome.
messaged with Megan yesterday, so we'll
Yay.
we'll figure something out.
No, it'll be so good. Okay. Well, I'm excited to get to chat with her too because, we get to co-host and that means we get to have the best of both worlds sometimes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome. Okay. Well, just a huge shout out to our sponsors. We've got IDEA Biosciences, Delcath Systems, Castle Biosciences, and Aura Biosciences who help to sponsor our podcast and our YouTube channel. Guys, thank you so much for being our sponsors, and a huge thanks to our listeners for being on. If you are listening and you haven't had a chance yet, go ahead and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're from. And then make sure that you connect with Katie if you would like and just read her story. We're going to link those links that you shared for your blog, and we'll make sure to, link anything important that Katie wants to share. I think the Huffington Post article would be great. And so, I mean, we're going to give you guys those resources. So make sure to check those out in the comments and the description below. With that, I will let you go, Katie, and we will see you next time.
See ya.